The year was 1865, and the frontier was a land of both birth and burial. Out there, where the pines thickened and the horizon burned red with dusk, mercy was as rare as rain. Elias Monroe rode alone, his horse's hooves thudding dully against the packed dirt trail, the air thick with the scent of pine sap and smoke. He was a man shaped by war and silence, carrying both like a second skin. The Union had taken his youth, the wilderness his peace. All that remained now was motion, forward, always forward, because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant breaking. By the time he reached the trading post, the sun had dipped low enough to bleed through the trees, staining the forest floor with rust-colored light. The building leaned like it was tired of standing, a shanty of timber and tin set against the endless green. From inside came the low murmur of men's voices, rough and uneven, like stones rolling in a bucket. Elias tied his horse to the hitching post and pushed through the swinging doors. Smoke hit him first, then heat, sweat, and whiskey. The room stilled for half a heartbeat when he entered. Travelers, trappers, and drifters turned their heads, eyes sharp from habit. Then the moment passed, and the low conversation resumed. Behind the counter, a man with a bristled beard polished a glass with a dirty rag. In the corner, 3 cowhands played cards, their laughter brittle with liquor. And near the far wall, a young Cheyenne trader stood quiet and alone, his back straight, his face set like carved stone. Elias moved slow, hat low, voice even. Need feed for the horse, some jerky, and a place to sit a spell. The barkeep nodded toward the counter. Ain't got much, but you're welcome to what's left. Pay first. Elias dropped a silver dollar, the sound of it echoing like judgment. It might have ended there, just another night, another nameless stop on a road, with no mercy, but the air shifted. One of the card players, red-faced and staggering, pointed at the Cheyenne. Hey, barkeep, you serving savages now? His voice carried the slur like a blade. The room tensed, laughter dying in throats. The trader didn't answer. He kept his gaze low, his hands still, waiting for it to pass. Elias watched, jaw tightening. The drunk took another step, spit curling at his lips. Ain't right, him standin' here like he belongs. Don't he know what you bastards done in the valley? Elias spoke before he thought. You talk too much for a man who's never left the valley himself. The man's head snapped toward him. What did you say, stranger? Elias didn't move. Said you're drunk. Sit down before you do something foolish. That was all it took. The card player's chair screeched back. His hand went for his revolver. The room froze, the space between motion and violence narrowing to a breath. Elias saw the reflection of the gun in a glass bottle behind the counter, saw the Cheyenne's eyes widen. Then came the sound of the hammer pulling back, a metallic click that split the air. The first shot cracked the bottle in 2. The second tore through the lamp. Shadows exploded across the room. Men shouted, ducked, fired. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid. Elias hit the floor, behind an overturned table, his revolver already drawn. The drunk stumbled, bleeding from his shoulder. The Cheyenne trader fell beside the counter, blood blooming dark across his chest. A woman screamed somewhere beyond the smoke. When it ended, the silence was worse than the gunfire. The smell of iron hung heavy. 3 bodies lay still. One of them was a boy, barely 14, sprawled near the doorway with his eyes open and glassy. Elias lowered his gun slowly, breath trembling. He hadn't seen the boy there. God help him, he hadn't seen him. The woman came running, a young face streaked with ash and tears, skirts torn, voice raw. Daniel. She dropped beside the boy, hands shaking, pressing against the wound that wouldn't close. Her sobs cut through the haze. Then her eyes found Elias. You did this, she whispered. You killed him. Elias took a step back. Ma'am, I didn't. She surged to her feet, grief twisting her features into something fierce. Don't you speak. You brought this here. Your kind, your guns, your cursed road. Outside, the last of the cowhands were already fleeing on horseback, hooves striking sparks from the stones. The trading post creaked, a lamp spilling fire onto the floorboards. Elias moved toward her, hand raised. We have to go. It's catching. But she wouldn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the boy's face, her lips trembling. "Leave me," she said. "You've taken everything already." Elias looked at her, then the spreading fire, then the boy's still form. He knelt, grabbed the boy's blanket, and covered him. The flames licked higher. The roof groaned. "Ma'am," he said again, quieter now, "you can curse me later. But if we stay, we burn." Something in his tone, flat, final, military, cut through her fury. She hesitated, then let him pull her toward the door. They stumbled into the cool night, as the building collapsed behind them in a roar of sparks and smoke. They stood in the clearing, the fire painting the sky. Her name, he learned then, was Sarah. Her brother, Daniel, had been her only family left since the war. She wouldn't look at Elias, wouldn't speak. He didn't blame her. There were no words big enough for what she'd lost. He turned toward the horse, loosening the reins. "Nearest fort's a week's ride north," he said. "There's food, a doctor. You'll be safe there." "I don't need your help," she snapped. "Maybe not," he said softly, "but you need a way out." Her eyes flashed with anger, then pain. She looked toward the burning post, their only shelter now ashes, and said nothing. Elias mounted up, held out a hand. "You ride or you die here." For a long moment, she stood there in the firelight, caught between hate and survival. Then, wordless, she took his hand. They rode through the night, the only sounds the creak of leather and the whisper of hooves on damp earth. The forest pressed close, dark and endless. Smoke trailed behind them, twisting into the stars. As dawn broke pale and cold, they stopped by a stream. Sarah dismounted without a word, kneeling to wash her face. Elias watched her from the other side of the fire he built, his movements quiet, deliberate. She looked young when the anger left her face, too young to have seen so much death. He wanted to say something, to offer apology or prayer, but words were tools he no longer trusted. So he worked instead, tending the horse, checking the rifle, pretending the silence between them wasn't heavy as stone. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but sharp. "You think this makes you right? Helping me?" "No," Elias said. "It makes me responsible." She turned away, shoulders stiff. "You think that matters?" He looked toward the tree-line, where mist moved like ghosts through the pines. "Out here, ma'am," he said quietly. "It's the only thing that does." They rode again before the sun climbed high, their shadows long and unsteady across the dirt trail. Behind them, smoke still rose from what once was shelter. Ahead, the wilderness waited, unforgiving, endless, alive. And somewhere beyond those dark trees, something waited for them. Something not quite man, not quite beast, but born from both. Elias felt it before he saw it. A shift in the wind, a silence too deep for comfort. He didn't speak of it. Not yet. The frontier had its ways of testing a man. His test had only just begun. The wilderness stretched on without mercy, a maze of pine and fog that swallowed sound and sense alike. For 3 days, Elias and Sarah rode in silence, the rhythm of the horses' hooves marking time like a weary heartbeat. The forest changed as they pressed north, thicker, darker, colder. Each mile seemed to close in around them, branches tangling like claws above their heads. The wind carried the scent of rain and rot, and sometimes when the light fell just right, Elias thought he saw shapes moving between the trees, shadows with the patience of hunters. They stopped only when the horse began to stumble. The animal's breath steamed in the frigid air, its flanks slick with sweat. Sarah slid from the saddle and staggered toward a fallen log, wrapping her arms tight around herself. Her face was pale beneath the dirt, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Elias dropped their gear beside her, struck flint to steel, and coaxed a flame to life. It flickered weakly against the damp wind. "Eat," he said, handing her a strip of jerky. She didn't take it. "How much farther to the fort?" 5, maybe 6 days if the weather holds. "And if it doesn't?" He looked at the gathering clouds. "Then we pray it does." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "I stopped praying when the soldiers came to our town. My father prayed too." Elias didn't answer. He stared into the fire until it blurred, until all he saw were faces, men screaming, horses falling, the smoke curling like ghosts above burning fields. He'd once believed in prayer himself, but war had a way of teaching a man that God didn't listen past the sound of gunfire. By morning, the rain had started, a thin, relentless drizzle that turned the trail to mud. Their boots sank deep, the horses' pace slowing to a trudge. The air was heavy with mist. Sarah's clothes clung to her like a shroud, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Elias offered her the reins, letting her ride while he walked beside the horse, rifle slung across his shoulder. She didn't thank him, but he hadn't expected her to. Guilt didn't buy forgiveness, it only paid for time. They reached the river by midday. It wasn't wide, but it ran deep and fast, swollen from the rain. The current snarled between jagged rocks, carrying branches and debris. Elias studied at Josette. "We cross here," he said. Sarah blinked at the rushing water. "You're mad. We'll drown. We'll die slower if we stay. Supplies are gone. Firewood's soaked. You want to freeze or try your luck?" Her silence was answer enough. Together they tied what little they had to the horse's saddle, tightening the knots until their fingers burned. Elias led the way into the water, boots slipping on slick stone. The cold hit like a knife. The horse snorted, ears flat, fighting the pull of the current. Sarah followed, teeth clenched. Halfway across, the river surged. A broken log struck the horse's flank. It reared, jerking the reins from Elias's hand. Sarah screamed as the current swept her sideways. Elias lunged, catching her arm. The water dragged at them both, relentless, pulling them toward the rocks downstream. He gritted his teeth, forcing each step until his boots found purchase on the far bank. He hauled her up beside him, both gasping for air. They collapsed in the mud, trembling. The horse, miraculously, had made it too, though the packs were half torn loose. Elias's arm bled from a gash he hadn't felt until then, crimson seeping through his sleeve. Sarah noticed first. "You're bleeding. Been worse. You'll get fever." He gave a faint smile. "If I do, I'll make sure to haunt you proper." Something shifted in her then. For the first time, she almost smiled, though it was brief, fragile as a flame in the wind. She tore a strip from her skirt and wrapped it around his arm, her hands steady. When she finished, she sat back, looking at him with wary eyes. "Why help me?" she asked quietly. "You could have ridden off after the fire." He met her gaze. "Because I started it." "You didn't start the war." "No," he said, voice rough, "but I carried it with me when it ended." Night came cold and unforgiving. They made camp beneath a rocky overhang, firelight dancing across the stone. The rain eased to a whisper. For a long while neither spoke. Then Sarah broke the silence. "You fought for the Union?" "Till the end. My father fought for the South." Elias nodded slowly. "Then I reckon we've both buried too many ghosts." Her eyes softened, though her voice still held steel. "My brother was all I had left. You can't make that right." "I know." He stared into the flames. "But maybe I can make something else right before I'm done." The words hung between them like smoke. Sarah turned away, pulling her blanket tight. Sleep came fitful, full of distant thunder and the rustle of unseen things in the dark. At dawn, Elias woke to a sound that didn't belong, the snap of a branch, sharp and deliberate. He reached for his rifle, scanning the trees. Then he saw him, a man crouched in the underbrush, his skin painted with ash, his leg caught in a rusted iron trap. A Cheyenne no more than 30, eyes fierce despite the pain. The man said something in his own tongue, voice strained. Elias lowered his weapon. "He's caught bad," he said to Sarah. "Leave him," she whispered. "He'd do worse to us." Elias shook his head. "He's dying slow. No man deserves that." He stepped closer, ignoring her protest. The Cheyenne's gaze followed his every move, hand tight around a crude knife. Elias knelt, pried the trap open with his rifle stock, and freed the man's leg. The steel teeth clattered shut with a metallic snap. The man breathed hard, then spoke in broken English. "White man, not fool. Not today." Elias tore a piece of cloth, wrapped it around the wound. "Name's Elias. You?" "Tejo," he said. "I go north. Fort." Sarah's eyes widened. "He knows the fort?" Tejo nodded weakly. 2 days. Maybe 3. I show. You help. Elias glanced at Sarah. We'll take him. Her jaw tightened. You're insane. He'll slit our throats in our sleep. Elias stood, voice calm. Maybe, but if we leave him, that river won't be the last thing we bury. They built a stretcher from branches and rope, tying it behind the horse. Tejo rested there, pale but alive. As they moved north again, he began to speak of soldiers and broken treaties, of a land that no longer belonged to its own. Sarah listened, silent at first, then with growing unease. The world she thought she knew was smaller than she'd imagined. When night fell again, they camped beside a dead oak. The fire burned low, casting their shadows long and thin across the earth. Tejo slept fitfully, murmuring in his language. Sarah stared into the flames, voice low. Maybe you're right, she said. Maybe no one's clean out here. Elias looked at her, the lines on his face deep in the firelight. The frontier don't care who's clean, he said. It just shows you what you are when the dying starts. The wind shifted, carrying the distant cry of a wolf. Sarah shivered and drew closer to the fire. Elias sat watch, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the trees. He could feel the land watching back, cold, patient, and waiting for its next test. The night whispered with unseen movement. And somewhere out there, in the black stillness of the pines, something answered. Dawn broke like a wound across the horizon, red, raw, and full of warning. The forest stirred beneath a skin of mist, each breath of wind whispering through the pines like a ghost sigh. Elias stirred the dying fire, his movements slow and deliberate, while Sarah packed the last of their things. Tejo still lay pale and trembling, his wounded leg wrapped tight, but his eyes were sharp again, watchful. They had less than a day's ride to Fort Mercy, and the promise of safety hung between them like a fragile dream. Neither dared to speak aloud. Elias tightened the cinch on the horse's saddle and scanned the tree line. Something felt wrong. The birds were silent, the air heavy, and the quiet carried a shape, too still, too aware. He rested a hand on his revolver. We move now, he said, voice low. No fire, no noise. We're being followed. Sarah froze. By who? He didn't answer, because he already knew. Some debts didn't die easy. The men from the trading post, the cowhands who'd fled into the smoke, were still out there. He'd seen the tracks 2 nights back, boot prints in the mud, a broken branch at shoulder height. Men hunting men. They wanted revenge, or perhaps silence. Either way, they were close. They set out through the mist, the forest closing around them in a tunnel of shadow. Tejo leaned on Elias's shoulder, limping heavily, whispering directions in short bursts. Fort East, Cross Ridge, Big River again. His voice trembled but held steady with purpose. Hours passed in tense silence. Every crack of twig made Sarah flinch, every gust of wind carried the promise of gunfire. When the trail widened near a clearing, Tejo raised a hand. Stop, he hissed. His gaze swept the treetops, narrowing. Elias followed his eyes and saw it, the faint glint of metal high above, sunlight kissing a rifle barrel. Down, he shouted. The first shot tore through the trees. Bark exploded beside Sarah's head. She hit the ground, scrambling for cover behind a fallen log. Elias fired back. Once, twice, the reports deafening in the still air. Tejo dragged himself behind a boulder, his breath ragged. The attackers came fast, 3 of them, faces grim, eyes wild with the same fever Elias had seen too many times before. The past, it seemed, never forgot the smell of blood. Elias fired again, dropping 1 man. Another returned fire, bullet slicing through his coat, grazing his side. Pain flared, hot and immediate, but he stayed steady. Sarah, he called. Stay down. But she wasn't the kind to stay down anymore. Crawling through the brush, she reached Tejo's rifle where it had fallen, hands shaking as she lifted it. Her breath came short, eyes wide, but she didn't hesitate when one of the men broke from cover, charging toward Elias. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The man dropped, his shout cut short by the echo of her shot. The forest fell silent again, save for the labored sound of breathing. Smoke drifted upward, curling through the pines. The last attacker had vanished into the trees, leaving only the rustle of retreat. Elias didn't chase him. He knew better. A wounded beast was the most dangerous kind. He knelt beside Sarah. Her hands were still trembling, but her gaze was steady. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Her lip trembled. "You saved mine first." They shared a look that carried more than gratitude, something rawer, older than words. Guilt, forgiveness, the fragile thread of understanding between two people bound by loss. Tejo coughed, grimacing as he pressed a hand to his wound. "They come again," he warned. "More men. Always more." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we make our stand at the fort. We finish it there." They pushed through the forest until the trees began to thin. By afternoon, the land opened into rolling hills, the air sharper, cleaner. And there, in the distance, half-shrouded by mist, stood the weathered outline of Fort Mercy, a small cluster of palisade walls and smoke rising from within. But Mercy, Elias knew, was never freely given. They were half a mile out when the world erupted again. A gunshot cracked from behind, followed by another. The horse reared, whinnying in terror. Tejo cried out, falling hard. Sarah hit the dirt, rolling behind a stump as bullets ripped through the air. Elias spun, firing toward the ridge, for riders had appeared, silhouettes cutting through the fog, the surviving cowhands and their reinforcements. "Run for the fort." Elias barked. "I'm not leaving you." That wasn't a request. She hesitated, torn between fear and defiance. But Tejo grabbed her hand. "Go," he rasped. "He fights better alone." Elias turned back toward the attackers, reloading fast. His heart hammered, but his mind was cold, steady. He'd fought too many battles to mistake courage for survival. The riders descended the hill, shouting, guns blazing. Elias took the first in the chest, the second through the leg. The third hit him, shoulder this time, spinning him sideways, but he stayed upright, firing again until the hammer clicked empty. Smoke clung to the clearing like fog. Blood soaked his sleeve, warm against the cold air. He could barely hear now, just the ringing in his ears and the distant pounding of hooves as Sarah and Tejo neared the fort. Then came the final rider, the leader, face half-burned, eyes gleaming with fury. He dismounted slow, a revolver in one hand, a sneer curling his mouth. "Didn't think we'd find you, did you, soldier?" Elias wiped the blood from his mouth. "Didn't think you'd be fool enough to try." The man laughed, low and mean. "You killed my brother. Your brother shot first. Doesn't matter now." He raised the gun, but before he could fire, the sharp crack of a rifle split the air. The man jerked, eyes wide, and fell forward into the dirt. Behind him, smoke drifted from Sarah's rifle. She stood a few paces away, breath ragged, the weapon trembling in her hands. Elias exhaled slowly, the adrenaline draining from his limbs. "Guess I owe you twice now," he said. She didn't smile this time. "Let's just call it even." They half-carried, half-dragged Tejo through the fort gates as soldiers rushed to meet them. The commander, a weary man with a graying beard, barked orders for medics and supplies. Inside the walls, the world felt suddenly smaller, safer. Elias sank to the ground, leaning against the wooden barricade. The ache in his arm throbbed in time with his pulse. Sarah knelt beside him, pressing a cloth to his wound. "You're not dying on me now," she said. He looked at her, eyes soft despite the pain. "Didn't plan on it. Not after all that." Tejo was carried off on a stretcher, his face calm at last. As the chaos settled, a strange quiet filled the air, the kind that follows survival. Too deep for relief, too heavy for joy. Elias gazed out beyond the walls, where the forest waited. Vast, indifferent, eternal. "Guess the frontier had one more lesson left," he murmured. Sarah followed his gaze. "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "It ain't the land that tests us. It's what we choose to be in it." She said nothing, but her hand found his, steady and warm against the chill. The sunrise spilled gold across the fort, painting their faces in light. For the first time in a long while, Elias felt something close to peace. "So, what do we take from this tale? Maybe this. The frontier was never just a place. It was a reckoning, a mirror for every soul brave or foolish enough to cross it. Elias Monroe came to those woods searching for forgiveness. What he found was humanity. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, traveler, may your fire burn bright in the dark.